Welcome back, my friends, to the Mail-Right Real Estate Agent Podcast Show. You're on episode 133 with Jonathan Denwood and myself, Thomas J. Nelson. And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Mr. Scot Smith, Esquire. That's right, Esquire, folks, because we're talking to an attorney. And Scott is the gentleman that founded and owns Royal Legal Solutions. And you know what? If you're an investor or if you represent investors, or you've become suddenly a landlord because you inherited a property, this is the guy you want to listen to today because he is going to save your assets, excuse me. And without further ado, I want to welcome Scott to our show. Scott, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, guys. Really great to be here with both of you here today, and it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to be on Facebook Live, where everything is candid. And one thing I can promise you here today is that I'm a very candid, very laid back person. So there's no topic we can't get into, talk about, whether it's nitty gritty, the scary stuff that nobody else wants to talk about. I have an opinion on it, I guarantee. And, let's get into the weeds.
All right. Well, we're going to do that in just a minute. I want to give Jonathan a chance to introduce himself and tell everyone a little bit about his services.
Oh, thanks, Thomas. I'm the founder of Mail-Right. We're a website marketing platform aimed at real estate agents and aimed at getting them quality leads. Back to you, Thomas.
And I'm Thomas J. Nelson. I'm a residential realtor and an investor here in San Diego, California. And I am with Big Block Realty, where you can find me on thomasjnelsonrealtor.com, representing investors, military, and yes, helping people work through that divorce. I have a special niche working with divorcees, helping them make informed decisions before they settle. All right, we're going to get into our show today. We have a lot to cover, so I want to dive in with Scott. Scott, I want to come right out of the gate with people that have invested in real estate or are planning to. One of the things they have to think about is asset protection. So what are some of the things you can do to safeguard your properties that you're purchasing to buy and hold for rentals?
Really, it depends on where you're at and how many properties you have. A lot of people don't have anything that's worth protecting, right? So if you don't have anything, don't waste the money on setting up company structures. But once you have about 50,000 plus in equity, then it starts making sense to start looking at, how do we protect and hide our assets from lawsuits? And one of the key things that I think that a lot of people don't talk about, and if you haven't heard this following phrase, then you need to start down your journey of looking at asset protection. If you don't know the value of separating all of the operations of your company from all of the assets of your company, you don't even really understand the first step of what it is, of what's available and legal strategies to help protect yourself.
Could you explain that a little more? Because I have a feeling you already got question marks popping up.
Yeah. Well, so what happens with lawsuits is that I can only sue somebody that I am connected to, right? Like somebody has to say something to me or have a document like a contract. There has to be some type of interaction for me to sue somebody.
Okay.
So what we do for real estate investors is we take all of their money, all of their properties, and we put that in one LLC. And then we take a completely separate LLC and we use that as an operating company. That operating company is their face to the world. It's the one that signs the contracts, makes the representations, does everything. Because that's the one we want people to sue, is the one that's making all the representations. So imagine how cool that is that the only one they can sue is the one that doesn't actually own anything, right? And everything else is protected over in this little castle.
Okay, so you raise a question because in my training, I've learned that essentially I was told by an attorney years ago that for every property you own, you should have an LLC attached to it. And then I've heard people contradict that. So can you clear that up? I mean, is that an LLC per property or that encompasses all your property? How do you set it up?
So I look at this question from a businessman and an investor, which is I look at what is my cost for the actual structure that I'm putting in place, and I weigh that against how much equity that I'm protecting. That's where I think that $50,000 mark is really like a good realm for me to say, okay, great. Well, now I'm going to start looking at putting in an LLC. So what you want ideally for asset protection is every asset compartmentalized, right? So every single property would be in its own LLC, and we want the company and the property is held anonymously. So that way nobody can connect up our properties to us, or our company to us in any way. So that's your ideal situation. Then the question becomes, well, how expensive does that get, and how much does that complicate my life, right? And that's what separates an average CPA or attorney from specialists like myself that use structures that are efficient, don't complicate our lives, and also give us those types of protections. But we really want to think compartmentalize every asset, and let's hide it, so that way when people look to sue us, it doesn't look like we own anything.
Okay, now what about, because I've heard this misconception. What do I need to do that for, Scott? I've got insurance. Yeah,
insurance is great. I have great insurance too, and everybody should, right? The misconception, I think, and correct me on this, Tom, is not that should I have insurance, is I have insurance so I don't have to be worried. Is that right?
Right.
Typically what that is, right? Well, the piece about insurance is that insurance only protects you against accidents. Right. And in legal terms, we call that negligence on your property. It's not going to protect you against every other type of legal claim that exists. Right. So that includes even, gross negligence, which is a really bad accident. Right. Okay. Insurance companies don't cover that. Right. And you'll find that insurance companies are really in the business of collecting premiums and denying coverage. So when a lawsuit happens, that's a really bad one, they can always fall back on some of these legal loopholes like gross negligence to be able to deny you coverage and leave you having to defend yourself and suing your own insurance company. Wow. I don't like to be in that position.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about, from your experience, I know there's probably a plethora of scenarios, but let's just say maybe the top 5 things you see property owners get sued for by their tenants.
Yeah, so you'll get tenant lawsuits that'll happen, and those are relatively small potatoes, really, right? That's why we have insurance, is because we want these nuisance lawsuits to go away, and that's why you want to be well insured for a lot of that. Then and those lawsuits typically will be against whoever the leasing party is. So if that's you, if you own a property in your individual name, you're in the worst possible position, right? If somebody sues you in something totally unrelated to your real estate and your personal life, they can come and take your real estate. If a tenant sues you, they can come and take your real estate because that's a lawsuit against you because you're the property manager. So in the instance that what you want is my property is protected in LLC. So if somebody sues me, they can't get to the property. If a tenant wants to sue me, they sue whoever signed the lease, which is where I want that also to be that operating company, that shell company that enters into those contracts with people. Because what we want to do is say, even if our worst case scenario happens with this lawsuit and we lose and it's a really bad judgment, at the end of the day, it's a shell company and there's nothing that they're going to get after the fact.
Okay, so now we've probably got some people listening that are signing leases in their own name and don't have an LLC. And we've now put the fear of God in them. So what do we do to get them right? Like what are the steps somebody can take with an already signed lease with a tenant in place to make these corrections and get these protections in place?
Yeah. So don't be afraid that, that there's not hope out there for you, right? The reality situation is that if you're somebody out there that owns property in your own name and has the leases that you've been signing, is that you're just like 90% of everybody else that's gotten to real estate, right? I mean, Rich Dad, Poor Dad taught you the exciting parts and the lucrative part about buying a property, but it sure didn't teach you about how to take it to a really professional level, right? They kind of stop, 70% along the way, and then you have to do a lot of exploration after the fact. So if you're working with somebody that's experienced inside of asset protection with the company structures, you should be able to get fully protected within a week, right? Because we're talking about it aren't huge time frames to be able to set these entities up. You're basically talking about filing a company, composing some trust documents to be able to be used to hide assets and hide the ownership, and then a number of deeds to get filed with the county clerks. And that's as complicated as it really gets. I mean, from 10,000 feet up, we're just establishing a structure, taking some deeds and moving title. How do you do that to actually have an effective system? Well, that's where the magic comes from, right? But that's essentially the nuts and bolts of what's going on.
Okay. So what would somebody expect to pay? And I know this varies depending on who you hire and what state you're in, but like if somebody came to you, you're in Texas, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just say I'm a property owner in Texas, and I've just had this realization of my exposure, and I come to you and I've got one single family property I want to do this protection plan for. So what in that week, how much time or how much money am I typically spending to convert to an LLC?
So we work with clients that are here in Texas, but also clients that are nationwide. My limitations and our limitations as a firm is that we can't step into court anywhere, right?
Oh, okay.
So what we do is we'll set up people, people come to talk to us, and we set them up as a Texas representation for an out-of-state representative. And anybody can do that, right? That's not anything special. But to get to your question on that, it's like, what do typical costs look like? It really depends on what you want. Right? If you're just looking for anonymity and you just need a land trust, an anonymous land trust in combination with a deed, you're talking fees at around, I see typically around $400 to $500 to be able to set that up. If you're saying, hey, I have multiple, if I have one property, I want an LLC in that, maybe you're spending anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000 to have that piece put together. An LLC probably wouldn't spend more than $1,000 for. If I'm looking for these, the more sophisticated structures, like a series LLC, which I could establish in Texas and use it anywhere in combination with anonymity trust, I'm probably talking anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000. And the most sophisticated structures that we use for California residents is a Delaware statutory trust, which avoids, if properly structured, avoids franchise taxes in California while giving them all of the series protection, all of the compartmentalization. And those structures are typically running anywhere between, I would say, markets around $6,000 to $9,000 to set up.
Okay. So there's a menu of services, then they're appropriately priced. But now what about from a tax perspective? Am I double taxing at this point because now I have an LLC, or does that affect me tax-wise?
No, your taxes will actually stay exactly the same way they are right now, because the whole entity structure will be completely passed through, and you'll report it on the Schedule E of your personal income tax return if you're a single person or a married couple. Did you know about this 2018 tax bill, though, with some people that are looking at establishing C Corps to hold properties?
I was going to take the conversation there later, but since you brought it up, let's go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry to jump the gun on you. But
no, that's okay. Hey,
on taxes, Yeah, well, it's really interesting, right? Because they want it. There's people out there that are toying with the idea of saying, if you don't ever need the property distributed to you, and you're just going to hold it inside of a C Corp, then you can actually have a lower effective tax rate at that point.
Then an LLC.
Yeah, well, it's the C Corp in particular is the one that you would end up doing that in, right? Because I think it's 18% or something like that for the 2018. I'd have to look at back in my notes, but in any case, it's always going to be lower than your if you're in a higher tax bracket. It's much lower than that by like half, I think.
So in other words, if I had an LLC and I'm at whatever I'm paying, like let's say I'm at 35%, and then I decide, hey, I'm never going to liquidate this property, that would be cause to go into a C Corp, because then I can lower my taxes and not worry about the double taxation on the gain if I did sell it back to myself or sell it on behalf of myself, that is?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because you're on for an LLC, all of the income has to be distributed to you at the end of every year to avoid LLC tax. Okay. So if we're going to keep all of the income year over year in the C Corp, then we can leave it in there, and as long as we don't need it, then we can build our resources more effectively inside of the C Corp. And that can make a lot of sense, right? If you're doing, like you're combining your business expenses with things that you want to do in your normal life anyway. Like if I really want to get that jet, then what I really need to do is start thinking, okay, how can I use the jet with the C Corp? Because that's where I really need to go to Milan, because that's the real estate conference. Right. Like you start playing this game of like, where do I shelter expenses, right? And what do I want to do?
Okay, but but let me be clear, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a little confused here. Is this strictly regarding the sale of the property, or is this saying that even the rents I'm collecting need to stay in the C Corp and I can't touch those as income?
Yeah, nothing. right? The whole point is
Okay.
to say that I'm never going to it's never going to hit my personal return.
Okay.
Everything is going to stay in the C Corp once it goes in.
All right. Now I'm going to ask a dumb question, but I have to ask it.
Yeah.
So what becomes of that money? Like who is that money for eventually?
Well, nobody. I mean, like, what would happen eventually is you die, right? And then it's whoever inherits the shares of the C Corp, right?
Okay.
Like,
That's where I was going. It's an
Yeah.
inheritance then for somebody
Yeah,
essentially.
essentially, right. And then during your lifetime, you have this little cash producing expense machine to do all of your, all of your expensing that you just need to do.
Okay. So this is a strategy then. If I've got this extra income that I don't really need to live on, I'm comfortable the way I'm living now. And so I've got this property that's just kind of generating an account or a trust, if you will, that it will eventually be inherited by my son. And then now when he inherits it, what kind of taxes does he face, or what's his responsibility to the C Corp?
Yeah, well, he'll end up inheriting a C Corp, right? And then he can make choices about and that circumstance of what they want to do. And there's a number of options at that point. But what you're essentially doing, right, is like I don't want to jump too far out of line here on a live Facebook chat, but if you start looking at saying like what are the scope of things that I can say are business expenses, it's pretty broad, right? And so what you're typically doing is saying like, do I have this, a big bucket of money that I can use for expenses? I'm going to pass it on to my heirs. At that point, you're able to do a lot of tax saving measures in preparation of that. And you should talk to an estate planning specialist that's going to help you be able to determine that effectively. If you're just a typical real estate investor, I mean, that kind of strategy with a C Corp probably doesn't apply to a lot of people. But if you're a typical real estate investor, really sticking with saying, what are my basic structures I can put in place? How do I get good insurance? How do I look at my LLC? What's my basic estate plan? Like just a basic living trust and a pour over will to help my assets, avoid probate. So that way I can make sure that they're protected and distributed how I want. Those are going to be like low hanging fruit that puts you 95% above everybody else that just hasn't even taken a swing at doing the right things, And if you start making a lot of money and you want to, hit me up about, hey Scott, how do I take this and really maximize it? Anybody can feel free to give me a shout, if you have that extra million just sitting around, you don't know what to do with it.
Oh, yeah, Thomas, I think we better go for our break, Thomas. And obviously you and me, Thomas, we're going to look at our jets this afternoon, aren't we, Thomas?
Yeah, I got to make sure they waxed it up.
Yeah, I'm going to upgrade this afternoon, Thomas.
Yeah, that's Scott, that's the beauty of working with Jonathan's podcast is we all get company jets, company cars.
That's good. I'm still waiting for mine to get delivered. It must have been delayed in the snowstorm.
All right, Jonathan, we have to go to commercial, don't we?
Yes, we're going to have to go for our commercial break.
I'll let you take it away, sir.
We're going to go for our commercial break, folks, and we'll be back in a minute. And like I say, I've already scheduled to look at my new jet this afternoon. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We're talking about jets, taxes, death, and limited companies. Back to my host, Thomas.
All right. Well, I mean, I could spend all day on that topic because I have so many questions, but I want to make sure we cover a few more topics as we're already halfway through the show. So, Scott, one of the things I know that you're qualified to talk about, and one of the things I'm seeing a lot of and done really badly, at least in Southern California, are these teams that they get set up for the purposes of bird dogging properties and bringing them back, and investment teams. And I'm watching other teams come in to retail listings and trying to force fit a bottom line strategy in a retail world. And so what's your advice for teams and maybe just some basics about what they should be doing to analyze the proper properties for their formula?
Yeah, so I would say some tips on that would be, number one is never hire a professional or do business with anybody that's not in the same business you're in, right? So if you're looking at hiring like a CPA or attorneys or even like loan officers and whatnot, you want all of those people to be in the real estate industry with you, because that means they've actually gone through the muck of knowing how things really play out and how they relate to other pieces, right?
Right.
It's one thing to be a professional in one category and not know how it works in the others. So one of the pieces when I look for when I'm establishing teams, and not just real estate, but teams for any of the businesses I'm in. I'm always trying to find how I can contribute the most valuable pieces to how can I be as most valuable as possible to any team that I would go into, right? Like you need one niche area that you're really strong in. And then you need a little bit of knowledge on everybody else's. So that way it helps you identify who are real players and who are people that just like to talk. Because there's a lot of people right now that's super soft because money is so soft, meaning everybody's trying to throw it into real estate.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin and whatnot. So what happens anytime you have a market like that is there's a huge amount of people that are all getting into it, and a lot of people are just throwing cash at it. So me and my professional friends, what we talk about right now is saying like, man, the money is just stupid. Like people are throwing money at stuff because people are promising a 20% IRR into deals. And I'm looking at these deals and I'm like, this is not it. This is a crystal ball deal, right? Like if you're telling me you got a crystal ball and you can know what markets are going to do, then I'm like, I'm probably not into that because you don't have it, I don't have it, right? So when we're looking at what teams that I want to partner with, it's kind of like saying that you like having a girlfriend in a lot of ways that what you want to do is start meeting her friends, you know?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's how we judge. Like that's how you know if you're going to have a good girlfriend or good boyfriend or whatever, right? Is like if you start meeting her friends and all of her friends kind of suck, then you're like, yeah, you're probably not that good when all of this fades away, you know? And like it's not any different investing with like people, right? Like if they don't have good contacts with who you're meeting that they've done deals with, and whatnot, then that's how I know. And like, forget about like clothes and cars and all of the material stuff. Those are like glitzes and glamour that people will use to bamboozle you into thinking they're successful. Really successful people have really awesome friends though. Like,
oh, there we go. That's why I'm single, Thomas.
Maybe Jonathan, you're just too choosy. You don't accept below a certain high caliber, and that's okay too.
No, Thomas will tell you the truth.
Well, it couldn't be that choosy. He picked me as a co-host.
One of my better decisions, probably.
Well, you know, Scott, I mean, you bring up a good point. What I truly think I see happening, at least here in SoCal, is that they're not all on the same page. And because I'll often end up talking to more than one team member, and you can hear two completely different philosophies about the property that they're discussing. And I mean, the thing that frustrates me is as someone that invests, I look at a market like we're in right now, and there's no way I would be investing in Southern California, not because I don't believe in it, because it's just, there's no ROI. There's not enough return to even get a positive cash flow. By the way, I do my numbers, and I'm pretty conservative, but what I'm seeing is these guys coming out and trying to force fit their model into retail properties. And I guess occasionally it's happening, but what I'm seeing is a ton of overpriced properties with no price reductions after 30, 60 days. They're 20, 30,000 over asking. You look up the tax records, you can see what they bought it for. You look at the property, you can estimate what they invested in it to get it to be a rehab, and they're just sitting there. And so a lot of these guys end up renting the properties, which is not what they want to do. But I mean, what's your advice to flippers? I mean, because I'm a buy and hold guy. I've never believed in flipping properties. I understand there's people that are really good at it. It's just not my forte. I'm a buy and hold guy. So I have a biased opinion about it to begin with. So I'd look to you for some advice on these guys that are going out and trying to flip in 2018. You know, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, flipping properties, when you're coming down to it, is that there's, you know, a couple of ways that I see people really lose money. The one way is that you buy bad, right? Like you're just too excited about the market. Right. And so you're really optimistic about what numbers should look like. Right. And the question I ask whenever I have, you know, a client that's a flipper and they're talking to me about a deal they want to go into is, you know, 50% of this game is actually knowing your client, and the other 50% it's law and investing and how numbers work as an investor, right?
Right.
So part of it, I look at it and say, well, okay, fine. I'm going to grant you the fact that you know the market better than me, right? But even in that, can you tell me that these are actually conservative numbers? Because out of all the unknowns, are you okay losing money on this property if it doesn't go exactly the way you want to, right? And if you are, and you want to take a stab at it, fine, go to Vegas, roll some dice, right? But if you're really depending on making money on this deal and stamping out consistent returns, then being conservative on your numbers is the only way that really makes sense, because there's too many variables to be able to have consistency. But that being said, some people are hitting home runs, and you'll hear those stories more than all the people that lost money, because people like to talk about wins and not losses, right? So be careful about the stories you're hearing, about and how practical that really is. And that brings us back to something we were talking about before we actually jumped on the phone, which is, do you feel comfortable having conversations with people about the bad stuff?
Right.
Like, can you really get in there with somebody and develop that kind of intimacy in a relationship where you can feel comfortable talking about all the stuff that really went wrong along the way? Because if you haven't, then you don't have the best information. And
I would agree.
Flying blind.
The team or the individual needs to be able to look at all aspects of this, including the risk, and the numbers don't lie. I mean, you can't force the numbers. They either add up to cash flow, break even, or you're in the red. But and it's like you said. I mean, some of the best investors I've met over the years, they're these very unassuming guys. I would tell you that the average guy I meet is probably in his 70s. In blue jeans and a Pendleton shirt, and drives a station wagon or an old sedan. You would never guess the guy to be worth what he's worth. And these guys are worth multi-million dollars. And, I worked with a lot of these guys during the 06 to 011 era of the Great Recession. And I learned a lot from them. And that's why I just scratch my head when I see this new generation of investors coming in to a market with a model that, is probably a good 5 or 6 years too late for the average home that's on the market. I mean, that's not to say there's not deals to be had, but you're not going to find them as much on the MLS right now as you got to go dig for them. You got to go find that non-performing property or that deferred maintenance property or that, distressed property that's not on the market. And those are getting harder to find.
Well, yeah, and that's why you need a good wholesaler, right? Like that's what, Kiyosaki and all those guys talked about as the basics. It's the 3 legs of the stool. You need a CPA, an attorney, and you need somebody that actually is a deal maker. And you as an investor have to find out where you're at. Where do you fit into that group, right?
Right.
And if you're like, okay, well, I'm not a CPA and I'm not an attorney, I think I'm the deal maker and I have some cash. Well, then your job is to network with a ton of wholesalers.
Right.
To be able to figure out how they're actually, what deals are they getting, and then leveraging your network to be able to go that way, right? I'm getting this impression though from what you're saying right now is that people aren't even running numbers like where you're at in that market, because that sounds like insanity. Like I haven't even heard of that among people that I talk to.
I would say I'm guessing that because I can't. I mean, that's what the end result is when you're seeing something that should be. Let's just use a 1-bedroom condo because I see a lot of those because they're easy to buy for a first-time investor. I'm right now representing a buyer that is in a $300,000 budget, and we're looking at properties that I'm running numbers on that should be priced around 250, 260 that are sitting there at 280, 290, and there's not a comp in a 6-month time frame or in a mile radius, which is essentially what an appraiser is going to do. That supports the price. And then they're sending me these comps that are 8 months old and they're 2 or 3 miles away. And I'm like, well, yeah, in that neighborhood, it is worth 290, but you're a block off the freeway. And that neighborhood's a nice, lovely side street where Leave It to Beaver music plays. There's a huge difference. They're trying to force fit the comps as I see it. So, and all I can imagine is, it was what you said earlier. They didn't do the numbers or they have that crystal ball, the market's going up, up, up. But if you're paying attention to the market, the last 6 months, it's kind of, it hasn't stopped, but it's definitely slowed down. And the rate of increase has definitely slowed down. Even though we're still moving up, it's not, month after month, we're seeing these huge leaps and bounds like we were a year ago.
I mean, what's going on and when prices can increase, but like rents can't because wages don't increase. Right. I mean, like if you just look at it from just macroeconomics of what's going on, like that would tell you, okay, that sounds crazy. You can't keep having that for forever. And then the other piece of it too is saying like, well, why wouldn't banks be happy to lend to stuff when it's $30,000 over market?
Right.
Well, maybe because they have a couple hundred years of investing experience.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and we've all been through this just recently. I mean, it's almost like everyone's got short-term memory, because I'm still licking wounds from '07. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of short sales I had to do and watch people foreclose and the carnage.
I call it financial Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, no, that's a good term, because you're reminding people. Now, a lot of the people I'm working with, thank God, they're conservative, and the number one thing that I encourage and almost demand of my clients is, if this is the budget, stick to it. Quit fudging it. Quit saying, no, well, this property is the exception. Well, why? What's going to be so exceptional about it when the numbers don't add up? You got to stick to the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so, right? Especially if, I mean, like the assumption is that, like, I can fudge numbers if the markets continue to improve. Because as long as markets continue to improve, then I'm cool, right? It doesn't matter what I pay. Because the market's going to continue to improve. But the question becomes in saying, like, that's great. If markets continue to improve, that's great. The problem is twofold. If markets start to reverse, one, now you're upside down on this house and you can't rent it for enough to be able to cover the mortgage. So you've just saddled yourself with like a life destructive financial event that you can't get out of easily, right? At all. And then the second part is that once markets start to reverse, let's say like we have this, stock market, it wasn't just a hiccup when we had the greatest loss, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's say something like that happens, right? Let's say if you didn't think 2008, they did the perfect thing to fix the economy, and maybe they kicked the can down the road, and maybe real estate markets might reverse and the stock market might reverse. The flip side of that too is when markets reverse, you also have upticks in litigation, because people will also start to sue more because now the pie is smaller. And so they feel like they need to take it from somebody else. So lawsuits actually go up. So imagine if you end up overshooting your property and you don't plan for what position am I going to be in if things reverse or things don't go the way I plan, then really what you're saying is, I'm really okay with taking a gamble that if I'm wrong when I buy this, I am okay with the next 20 years of financial pain.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of insanity, like, what must you live in if that's the world you live in? Because nobody taught you that. That's just something you're hoping. It's going to be okay.
I think we need to go for our to finish up on the podcast part of the show, Thomas, and then I've got a couple of questions, and I'm sure you have, and that being our bonus content. Would like to wrap up, Thomas?
Scott, Jonathan always cuts me off right when it's getting juicy, but there's a method to that madness, because we do bonus material on video, folks. So for those of you that are hearing us sign off on the podcast, you can continue this with us on YouTube or the MailRight website. But Scott, before we sign off, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how to get a hold of you if they want to get more information about your services.
Well, I prefer singing telegrams. If you really want to get my attention.
Nice. That's a first.
That would be always a good one. Those are welcome. Fruit baskets are also welcome. Getting healthier this year. Nice. But you can also go to our website, royallegalsolutions.com. You can reach us by phone at 512-757-3994. You can reach me by email at scott@royallegalsolutions.com. And no matter where you live or no matter what assets you're dealing with in real estate, give us a call, and it's very likely that we're going to be able to help you or connect you with somebody that can.
Okay, wonderful. Jonathan, what about you? If folks want to get their mail right, how do they do that?
Fruit baskets. No, you just go to the MailRight website, got the phone number, email. I answer the emails, and really easy to get hold of, Thomas. Back to you, Tom.
All right, and I'm on thomasjnelsonrealtor.com. You can also find me on social media, which is predominantly Facebook and LinkedIn for me. And, of course, the old-fashioned thing, give me a call at 858-232-8722. I'm Thomas J. Nelson with Big Block Realty here in America's finest city, San Diego, California. All right, folks, we're going to jump over to video only now, so come join us there. For those of you signing off with us on the podcast this week, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another exciting guest. See you later. Bye-bye. All right. Jonathan, I've been doing a lot of the talking, so why don't you hit Scott with your
Great.
questions?
Yeah, just a reflection because I personally think this is a great time to sell. Actually, it might not be the best time to buy, but I think it's a great time to sell. But my experience about some of these constructs that you've been talking about is there might be consequences when it comes to the time to sell. So is it really important, and I think you pointed this out, Scott, to have that very good relationship with an advisor like you, that the client really gives you an idea about their outcomes, when would they be looking to sell a specific asset that they're protecting? Am I correct about that?
Yeah, Jonathan, there's two ways that I think that I help people. And the first way is that, like, because I'm an investor myself, is looking at it and saying, does this make sense, right? Overall from a business for you. And then the second way I help people is saying, okay, well, what's the legal edge to it? So it's when people buy an asset, how do we make sure that it's protected while they have it? And then when they sell the asset, it's especially important that it's inside a protected structure, because it's typically when you sell that you get all of the liability, because that's when people say you screwed me, right, with what you sold me. And so that's why we want to say, okay, well, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, don't know, but this is what your legal options look like, and it looks like I'm going to be okay.
Okay. Did you have another question, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's escaped me. It's that Alzheimer's, Thomas. Can you?
Let me jump in there, because one thing we didn't touch on that I did want to bring up, because years ago, an aha moment for me was that people can use their 401ks or their IRAs to invest with, and I didn't realize that an entity like that could purchase a property. So can you just kind of go, I know it's probably a detailed process, but what are the broad strokes of doing that, Scott? And when would somebody decide to do that versus doing it a different way?
So there's three options. You set up a self-directed IRA with a custodian, and then you tell the custodian, buy me this piece of real estate. That's one way to do it. Something goes wrong with that piece of real estate, though, and they sue the real estate itself. Like, let's say that there's something wrong with, like, the staircase, grandma falls through the stairs, insurance doesn't cover you. They sue. They actually get to sue your entire IRA. IRAs are typically protected. If somebody sued you, they can't touch your IRA, but since the IRA in this case owned the asset, they can actually sue and take all of your IRA. So we say, not good. So what do? Is we spin up the self-directed IRA owned LLC. That's also referred to as a checkbook control LLC. Or if you're in California, what we would use is a business trust to allow you to do that. And with that, then now you can take your IRA money, invest it inside of this company, and have that company then purchase the asset. So if there's then a lawsuit against the asset, they can't touch your full IRA. They can only touch that company. So it protects all of your other IRA money. And it gives you this cool thing called checkbook control, which means at that point you can actually control your own investments without even having to contact your custodian. So you can really wheel and deal. Like, a lot of guys are like doing quick money changes for bridge loans to people and whatnot, that they're all managing all out of their IRA through these companies.
Okay. And then one of the other questions I had was getting back to when you were helping us with the original LLC conversation. If somebody post signing a lease with tenants in place, whether it's 1 or 10 properties, once they set up the LLC, do they need to go back through and re-sign leases under the LLC? And how does that work? Like, how do you then start implementing the asset protection with the new LLC?
Yeah, you would either re-sign the leases that you have from before, or you just wait for them to expire and release to the new entity, right?
Okay.
So it's just as easy as that.
Okay. All right. That was a question I wanted to hit you with before, and I forgot to ask it. So, Jonathan, did you come up with your question yet?
Yeah, the Alzheimer's gone away for a while, actually, Thomas. Another factor, Scott, it's probably linked to setting up a limited liability or corporation anyway, is that every professional I worked with has said the biggest problem is people mix their personal income asset with their either limited liability or corporation, and that breaks the structure, and that allows people to attack the structure. Is that the same with the things you set up? You have to explain to people they've got to keep income, they've got to keep the two entities very separate, their personal and the limited liability or corporation separate.
Yeah, it's so first of all is that everybody always mixes your income with an LLC, because that's how an LLC gets income, right? Like, it can't get it except from you. So you inherently have to. So the question becomes is, what the hell are attorneys talking about? Right?
Okay.
And what they're talking about is, can you keep track of, once I give this money to the LLC, did I keep track of that? Did I write that down somewhere, like an accounting ledger or an Excel spreadsheet or QuickBooks? And then after that, did I look at this as if it were belonging to the company? And so does that mean that I kept accounting records for what money got spent out of the company? And then if the company is going to pay me, because I'm a shareholder in the company, did I keep track of that as a dividend? Everything really boils down to accounting records. And if you have proper accounting records, pretty much you can't really screw up much of anything else. And one of the things that I like about forming companies, I can form companies up anywhere, but I typically will form them always up through Texas if the client will allow me to, because Texas has on par with asset protection of Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. It's cheap. It doesn't have year-over-year fees. And Texas allows you to do crazy things like you can fix your accounting records if you didn't do them. Like, you can go back and cure it. Like,
it sounds like the American government.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. You know? So it's like, as terms of like laws go, like, I really like that law. I really like the ability to say, well, you screwed up, but it's okay.
What about the Internal Revenue Service? What's their attitude about fixing your taxes afterwards?
Well, you fix the accounting, and then maybe you see, the one thing that you have to understand about IRS is that if you said I screwed up, there's two things you can screw up. If you screw up on the income and it's really bad, that's a crime, right? Can't do that. We never lie about our income. If I screwed up and I said, well, maybe I had some extra deductions here and maybe those were kind of sketchy, that's just a monetary penalty. And so we typically err on the side of saying, like, okay, well, make sure to do things that aren't crimes, because crimes are really hard to deal with. But if you screw up and it's a money decision, then it's a money decision, right? At the end of the day, that's the way business works, right? So but we always say is, like, you want to have your accurate accounting records no matter what, because like, it's paperwork at the end of the day that actually wins the argument.
Okay. Well, and speaking of which, because Jonathan raised a question that created another one, and that is you always hear about piercing the corporate veil. So when you set up an LLC, are there certain things you have to, like is there a board meeting, annual, that annual meeting I've heard about with S Corps and C Corps?
Yeah.
Like, how do you keep the integrity of the LLC so that it's not, you're not able to pierce the corporate veil, as I've heard it said?
Yeah. So there's two different pieces that's like piercing the veil or alter ego theories, right? So the number one thing is have accurate accounting records. That's going to save you from 95% of what's going on. Form up in a state like Texas, where if forming an LLC doesn't require you to have annual minutes, you don't have to do anything on an annual basis besides file a franchise tax. You don't actually owe any tax. You just have to file it.
Oh.
And have a registered agent. Like, if you form up in the right states, and the laws can be set up and the company can be set up where you don't have this headache of maintenance that gets jetted into your life. If you start trying to say that, I really want to set this up as a C Corp in Delaware, well, that requires a lot of maintenance to make sure you do it right. And then you better be equipped to be able to say it's worth spending the money on that. Because as an investor, you got to make some quick decisions on either I need to find like a specialist like I am to help me set it up, so that way it's painless for me to move forward, because Scott's already dealt with this for years of how to figure that out. Or you say, I need to look at this, if I'm going to set it up myself, on what is it that I'm actually going to do? Not that what I hope to do, but what am I actually going to do? Because it's not one of those deals that like half measures get you there. Right. When you're talking about asset protection.
So you mentioned earlier that, obviously you can work all 50 states. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then there are advantages to allowing you to set these entities up in Texas versus the home state of the client. What is the why would people resist that? Is it just a comfort thing, or why would they insist on it being in California when there's an advantage to setting it up in Texas?
I really can only talk to you about it. I say, like, why is there so many types of diets? You know,
Okay.
like, it's because somebody told them something once, right?
Right.
And I really want to do this ketogenic diet. Do you know anything about it or anything like that? No, but I think it's good. Somebody told me about it, and I say, okay, fine, whatever, right? Like, so I have my recommendations of what, I think, but, if somebody comes to me and, at the end of the day, like, that's what our company does, right? We'll do anything you really want us to do, as long as it's not too painful for us to actually have to do it. Otherwise we'll just say, maybe find somebody else, and we actually think it's going to work. Right. So there's some things that don't work. Right. Like, I would tell, setting up like a California LLC, for example, for, your asset holding, maybe does little to nothing, because California will just allow people to take your LLC membership interest. So What good does it do? Right. That's why, and they charge you $800 a year for the franchise.
Right.
Which is why we use Delaware statutory trust in California, because it avoids the franchise taxes and it doesn't have this thing that allows people just to steal your company, right? So there's things like that come in to make it really important of where you form and how you approach it.
You just gotta love California, haven't you?
Yeah, well,
really, they charge you a ton of money to really just try to screw you around every chance they get, from my experience with them. But I love the beaches and the people are great.
yeah.
There's a certain city in Southern California that's the best in the world, isn't it?
I didn't name it America's finest city. I just accept it and move within it. But hey, I know we have to wrap it up, but one last quick question. Scott, will you get together with somebody that is working with the CPA and maybe have a meeting of the minds with the CPA to coordinate this, or is that even necessary?
Well, yeah, if you have a CPA or even like your own attorney or anybody, I educate professionals on this stuff all the time. So okay. I'm even an instructor with the Austin Board of Realtors, teaching professional classes on this to other, real estate agents and other professionals. So, I'm down to talk some nerd real estate talk anytime.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one more time for our viewers now, if they want to get in touch with you, they have more questions, you've got their wheels turning, how can they get in touch with you?
Go to the royallegalsolutions.com website, or phone us at 512-757-3994, or email me directly at scott@royallegalsolutions.com.
All right. And once again, folks, Scott can handle your business in all 50 states, so don't let the borders be a barrier. Let's see, Jonathan, I think you probably want to share a little about yourself now. How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, just before that, it's been a pleasure talking to Scott, and I really enjoyed the interview, Scott, and you've been a very informative guest, and at some stage come back to the show. I've really enjoyed it, Scott. And how to get hold of us and me, just go to the Mail Right website. It's got all our contact details, Thomas.
All right. And I'm Thomas J. Nelson with Big Block Realty here in San Diego, California. If you need help buying, selling, or investing, give me a call. I'm a counselor as much as I am a salesperson, so I'll give you the advice. And sometimes my advice is it's better to wait. So we're building relationships here at Big Block Realty, folks, so don't be shy. Give us a call at 858-232-8722. Scott, I want to echo what Jonathan said. It's been a pleasure. I always know I'm enjoying a guest because when he cuts me off to end the show, and I have that, I got just a few more minutes. So we're going to have you back in the future because I think there's a lot more we can cover. But I really appreciate your time. Jonathan and I both appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with our audience, and we'll look forward to having you back on the show in the near future.
Great, guys. It was really a lot of fun, and thanks for having me. Great show.
All right. Adios.